Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Validity Podcast. I'm your host, Valentina Rodriguez, and I am so freaking excited to be back. I haven't recorded an episode in what feels like forever, and it realistically hasn't been more than like a month or so, but it feels like such a long time because so much has happened. So today's episode is really kind of just going to be a welcome back, and then I want to talk about Body Recomp and how to do it. Because one of the things I get asked the most is, if I want to put on muscle, do I have to go through a bulk? Is the only way to put on muscle by bulking, by putting on body fat, by being uncomfortable? And I also just get asked a general question of like, is it possible to gain muscle and lose body fat? I get asked different iterations of these questions time and time again. And there's not one specific scientific study that I can point to and be like, this is the definitive evidence that it is possible to undergo a body recomposition, which means putting on muscle and losing body fat at the same time. However, I think scattered throughout different studies that employ different interventions, we can see that subjects who follow a general criteria, which I will go through, do end up seeing reduced body fat percentage outcomes and increased muscle mass outcomes. And we'll touch on some of those studies, which, spoiler alert, newsflash, they are studies that we've covered in past episodes, but I just don't think that we've looked at the results through this specific lens, as well as bring in just anecdotal evidence from undergoing multiple recomps with many of my clients. So before we get into all that, like I said, I do want to kind of take this as a welcome back and kind of go through some personal updates. So it is now January. It is 2025. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. I've been in a little bit of, I don't want to say a funk, because there's nothing negative to my headspace right now at all. I just feel very different starting off this year than I have starting off other years. I still have that like new year, refreshed, like ready to grind energy that I think comes with the new year. But I don't have a clear direction as to where to pour that energy. So since I started competing in 2017, every single time a new year rolled around and I had to create my resolutions and create my goals, I didn't really have to think twice about what they would be. It was an immediate instinctive response, IFBB Pro. Like, apart from whatever else was kind of going on in my life, IFBB Pro. I was chasing that for literally 8 years straight. So every single year, IFBB Pro, IFBB Pro, IFBB Pro. And I posted my 2020 vision board on Instagram, and I talked about how that vision board had a bunch of things on it that I didn't accomplish at all in 2020. But looking back now in 2025, I'm like, I actually did achieve almost everything that was on that vision board. And so I loved having that vision board as like a North Star, kind of something that would guide my general direction. So on that vision board, I had IFBB Pro, so competition goals. I had graduation from Penn. I had just general little pictures of like academia and research. I had a little PhD thingy on there. I had a bunch of different things that I didn't really know how I was going to achieve them, but they were just things that I knew at some point I wanted to achieve in my life. And so again, looking back at 2025, I'm like, wow, these goals have remained constant since I made this vision board in 2020. So when 2021 rolled around, it was the same goals. 2022, same goals. 23, same goals. 24, same goals. So now I'm sitting here, 2025, new year, and I'm like so lucky, so grateful, so proud to look back and be like, wow, I accomplished the things that have been on my vision board, on my resolutions list, on my goals for years. I became a pro in 2024, which is crazy. I graduated from USF and earned my master's degree in exercise science, and I graduated at the top of my class with a perfect GPA, which was one of my goals, and I'm stoked to have done that. I accepted a position as an adjunct professor, and this is actually my first week of teaching. I haven't had my first in-person class yet. I will have that on Thursday, but it's still pretty fucking exciting. And I finished applying for all my PhD programs. So I did all those things in 2024. So now I'm sitting here 2025, trying to figure out my goals, trying to figure out where I want to pour all my energy into. And I'm kind of at a lull, so to say, because I have goals, but some of them are, at least for now, out of my control. And some of them are just not really 2025 goals. So it's like, I have all this energy, I have all this drive, like I want to pour it into something, but I don't have a clear path as to like what exactly I'm doing. And I think, well, I'll get to that at the end. I'll leave you on a little cliffhanger. So basically, obviously, my goal right now in the competition sense, or my upcoming goal, is to step on the Olympia stage. I want to be an Olympian. I don't want to stop at a pro card. I want to be really competitive in the pro league. I live and breathe and love this sport with every fiber of my being. I don't think that I would have been able to keep going and keep showing up in this sport, failure after failure after failure, for 8 years in a row, if it didn't literally light my soul on fire. And that same energy is the energy that I'm bringing into the pro league. And I want to be competitive as fuck as a pro. Like I want to get top call outs at my pro debut, which is not a small little teeny tiny goal. Like that is a big deal and something that's going to take a long time to achieve. And eventually I want to step on the Olympia stage. And I'm very realistic. I don't think the Olympia stage is something I'll accomplish within my first 1 to 3 to maybe even 4 competition seasons as a pro. I know that is a very long-term goal. So again, when I'm thinking about my 2025 goals, yes, Olympia would be on my vision board, but Olympia is not a 2025 goal. I don't even know if I want to prep this year because I have so many changes on the horizon. Like I, again, am teaching this semester. Hopefully I'll have some PhD interviews that I have to travel for this semester. Then hopefully I'm moving for my PhD in the summer. Then I'm starting a new PhD program, which is a whole beast in and of itself, in a new city. So prepping this year, I don't think makes logistical sense. Also, I think for the first time in my life, this morning I was, 577 days binge free. I have never been in this place with my relationship with food, with flexibility, with being dialed with my goals, but also being able to be really present in my social life. And that's not something that I want to compromise for a prep. And I had the same mindset before I started my last prep when I turned pro. I said in the YouTube video when I started that prep, I said to you guys, I am not willing to compromise the strides I've made in my relationship with food and in my relationship with my goals and flexibility and discipline and social life for just any prep. I'm only willing to potentially risk compromising those for the prep. I told myself I'm not compromising the strides I've made in every other area of my life for just a prep. It was going to be for the prep. And if I'm stepping on a pro stage, I think more time to grow is going to just ensure that next time I prep, it's going to be a prep that was worth it and that I end up competitive on the other side of that prep. So looking at my year, I'm like, okay, I know I don't want to prep and I know I need to grow. Honestly, mostly just my glutes and my hamstrings. I don't think my upper body needs to grow a lot to be super competitive. I think that if anything, I need my lower body to catch up. And so I'm looking at my year, I'm like, okay, I know I don't want to prep. I don't think it makes sense. I know that I want to grow, but I also don't know if I want to grow super aggressively. I think what was scaring me was the idea of if I don't prep, then that means I just have to grow indefinitely without a prep in sight. And I think for me mentally, it's a lot easier for me to go all in on systematic, aggressive growing and be okay with putting on that extra body fat when I know there's a prep on the other side of it, at least on the horizon. And I don't want to prep this year. Again, feel like I've said that 700 times. Sorry for being so repetitive. But I think that also made me kind of scared of okay, I want to grow, but I also don't want to grow like that. So I had just a lot of things that made me feel very ambiguous when looking at my 2025 in regards to my competition goals. And before I kind of get to what my coach and I decided, I'm going to go to the other one of my goals for the year, which was starting my PhD program. That's probably my biggest goal for the year. But again, when looking at my 2025, it was very hard to frame that as a 2025 goal because there is virtually nothing I can do to get myself closer to that at this point. I submitted all my applications in December of 2024, and from here on out, it's kind of out of my control. I either get acceptances or I don't. I either get interviews or I don't. The only thing in my control is if I get an interview, I have to make sure I don't bomb it. But even getting the interview is out of my control. And from my understanding, getting an interview is already a really good sign. So the most that I can do at this interview is fuck it up big time. I think it's less so about okay, here's where you prove you're a good fit. And it's more so here's where you make sure you don't disprove that you're a good fit. It's more so it's yours unless you lose it versus you have to earn it. But I don't know because I've never done one of these, right? So again, this whole goal of my lease is up in July and I want to move to wherever my new PhD program takes me and I want to start it and I want to do really well. All of that hinges on an acceptance, which at this point in time is probably 95% out of my control. I already did the work. The work was done in 2024. So in 2025, I'm what can I do to get closer to that? other than just not bomb any interviews I get. So again, looking at my year, I'm like, I want to set goals and I have all this energy to push these goals forward. And I don't know what to do with them. And last night I was scrolling my Pinterest and I came across this really cute like grilled chicken and potato meal, and it was really aesthetic and just like girly, and it was like, oh, so cute. And I just thought to myself like, oh, like at some point in my life I want to have a phase where I like maybe eat intuitively a couple times a week, and I spend just my free time getting into cooking and trying out cooking. That, you know, like I'm thinking like, wow, coming home after a PhD to like make a whole ass dinner, that's not realistic. And also if I'm in a really aggressive growing phase or a really aggressive prep, or like I'm in one of my dialed phases, like I'll be eating my meals, so like I won't be experimenting with dinner. And I just started going down this rabbit hole of like, oh, so I'm not really gonna have that when and if I start a PhD program. Over the summer I'll be moving, and then I stopped and I was like, holy shit, like this spring semester might be the only time I have with that free time, both literal free time in my agenda, and then also free time as in like flexibility with meals to get into cooking if that's what I want to do. So it made me really like just frame the fact that I have all this pent up energy of wanting to like grind because I'm used to having 700 things on my plate. And I kind of have to realize that if everything goes my way, and if this PhD program is meant to be for me, and I do in fact start it and move in the summer and start it in the fall, this might be my last little phase of like getting to breathe a little bit and getting to pour energy into other areas of my life that are not productive. They're just fun. Like cooking might not be productive. And I think I have this really unhealthy mindset sometimes of needing to find a way to make everything in some capacity productive. And like, if I start my PhD, that is the start of 5 years of grinding my ass off academically. So like, I think what all of this rant, the whole point is to say is that I think this semester I'm really, really, really going to try to pour some intentional energy into chilling the fuck out. Like actually. Which brings me to what my coach and I decided. So my coach and I had got on a call because I was kind of just getting anxious about prepping, growing. Like I felt like it had to be one or the other. And what we decided on was we're going to continue growing in the way that I'm growing now, which is like my food is high, but we're not pushing it unnecessarily. We actually brought it down a little bit because it didn't need to be that high because again, we're not growing super aggressively. So now I'm sitting at around 2,000 calories and I'm 4'11". I don't need to push too much more. And I'm taking 2, if not 3 flexible days a week. So that's kind of a nice little spot where I'm training hard as fuck. We're about to pull my cardio all together, meaning get rid of it. I'm keeping my step count up and I'm, grinding every day food wise, and then taking 2 to 3 flexible days. And I think that doing this for the next couple months when I'm getting into the semester as a professor, and then if I have PhD interviews, all of the traveling for those PhD interviews, and I will tell you guys about the PhD interview experience after the fact. I think that could be really valuable to talk to you guys about if anyone is interested in going the graduate school route. But I think that for the time being, this is a really nice little, like, you don't have a super specific end goal right now other than to just keep growing, keep training really hard, be present in your social life. On the days where you don't have anything going on, you're fucking ticking every box. And when you need the flexibility, you're going to take it. And then come like maybe March, April, when I'm well into the semester, not a ton on my plate, things should be like pretty easy, smooth sailing at that point, and I still have a couple months before I move. We're going to do a little bit of a mini cut just to get body composition in a good place. I think since we're not prepping, we're both on board with a mini cut being a good thing to set me up for my then really aggressive growing phase in the fall. And then just grow aggressively for probably like September, October, November, December, possibly even January, and then start a prep in early 2026. So this is the longest winded little personal update, but all of that is to say that that is the plan for 2025. And I kind of like it because it gives me pretty much the spring semester to not have a ton on my plate, at least fitness and competition goal wise, so that I can stop and breathe and try to pour energy into chilling the fuck out. Because I'm really bad at that. Okay, I think those are all my updates. In terms of this professor job that I took on, I am teaching 2 courses this semester. So I'm teaching 2 sections of online human nutrition, and then I'm teaching clinical labs in person, and those are Tuesdays and Thursdays. So I am very excited to kind of see all of that come underway. I am still leading the world's first reverse dieting study, and we are closing recruitment literally yesterday. But if you listen to this today and you send an email, we will get back to it, because I will make sure we do, because I get to make that decision. So we will get back to it. If you email today, email reversedietstudy@gmail.com, and it is your last opportunity to join the world's first reverse dieting intervention study. As a part of the study, you will need to undergo a maintenance phase. You will need to undergo a dieting phase where you lose 5% of your body weight. And after you lose 5% of your body weight, you will be randomized to one of 3 post-dieting approaches. One of them is ad libitum eating, meaning you receive no guidance. The other one is going straight back to a maintenance using an NIH maintenance calculator. And the third one is using a reverse dieting approach as informed by our reverse dieting survey study that we are in the process of publishing. But the abstracts are out, and we presented it at ISSN. So those are my personal updates in a very, very large nutshell. So now we get into what you guys are actually here for, which is, how the fuck do I body recomp? Because like I said, I get asked this question a gajillion and one times. And let's just define a body recomposition as gaining muscle and losing body fat at the same time. So what are the general criteria, conditions that we need to employ in order to ensure that this is happening? First and foremost, I kind of want to break this down into like a 2-sided equation and look at the two traditionally, and then look at the two when we try to combine them in a recomp. So gaining muscle typically requires a caloric surplus, meaning you eat more than what you're burning. And not only does it require a caloric surplus, it requires stimulation of anabolic pathways. And we do that through primarily 2 things. 1, adequate protein intake, and 2, resistance training. So in order to body recomp, you have to tick off those 2 things of the growing side of the equation, which is protein intake and resistance training. The caloric surplus we will talk about in a minute. And the other side of the equation, which is losing body fat, specifically body fat and not just body weight, meaning losing body fat without losing muscle mass, that requires a caloric deficit, which means that you consume less calories than you burn. And it also requires 2 things. It requires you stimulating the anabolic pathways to preserve the muscle as you're losing body fat. And that means that you need adequate protein intake and you need resistance training. So we know for a fact that if there's any overlap between building muscle and losing body fat, if we want to do the 2 things at the same time, then it is a non-negotiable that if there's any overlap, those have to be included in the body recomp conditions. And that overlap is specifically protein intake and resistance training. So those are your 2 kind of non-negotiable pillars, non-modifiable pillars of body recomp, okay? So what is adequate protein intake? Wow, lucky for you, I have a 3-part protein series on this podcast, and they tell you exactly what your protein intake should be for your goals. But if we're talking about body recomp specifically, then we're going to look at the higher end of the protein intake recommendations that I talked about in the 3rd part of that 3-part series. And that higher end is going to be 2.3 to 3.4 grams per kilogram of body weight. And I know this sounds really high, but this is where some of the studies that we've already walked through in past episodes come in. And this is where the body recomp data comes in. Because if you recall at the beginning of this episode, I told you there's not like one study we can point to that's like, this is recomp, but we can see through different studies that had different intervention aims, we actually see recomp occur, and then we can look and see what was common between all these studies. So in these high protein studies specifically, we see one where they employed 3.4 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, and they compared that to a group that was eating around 1.8 to 2.3 grams, so a lower group, or rather a normal group, because that would not be considered low in most studies. That's normal and well above the RDA and well above even just the muscle mass gain requirement of 1.6 grams per kg. And what they found was that between the groups, no one gained more muscle, which is to be expected because we've seen across the literature that in order to gain muscle, you don't need more than 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. You don't need that. We don't see additional muscle mass gain past 1.6 grams per kg. And again, I really encourage you to go back and listen to the protein intake studies because we went through those studies in depth in those episodes. But even though the normal protein group and the high protein group had no difference in muscle mass gain, the high protein group, their fat mass and their body fat percentage significantly decreased. So by consuming more protein, they increased their overall caloric intake and actually decreased their body fat. So increasing their protein to that 3.4 grams per kg, actually, yes, they were eating more, which in theory should make you think they're going to gain body fat because they're now in a surplus, or they're eating more than what they're being compared to, and they're eating more than what they were used to before the study. But actually what they found was that they dropped body fat. They dropped body fat by eating more protein. So that was recomp. That was recomp seen in the study, because in this specific study, even though we didn't see muscle mass gain, they gained weight and they lost fat mass. So recomp, evidence of recomp just by increasing protein intake. The other thing is resistance training. There was another study, which again, we covered, and it's actually a study by Dr. Campbell. And this was done in physique athletes. So they were resistance training, and they had a high versus low protein group. Basically, they said, we're not going to give you any recommendation besides for a protein recommendation. You can do whatever you want with your carbs and your fats and the rest of your intake. Like you can do whatever you want, so long as the high group consumes 2.4 grams of protein per kg of body weight. And then the low group can consume no more than 1.2 grams per kg. Okay. And what they found was that the high group, the high protein group, did eat more calories than the low protein group. They ate 1,800 calories on average versus the low group eating 1,400 calories. And instead, the high group gained significantly more lean tissue than the low protein group. They gained 4.6 pounds of lean body mass, of lean muscle mass, versus the low protein group that only gained 1.3 pounds. So that is a 3.3 pound difference of muscle by the group that consumed more protein. And I know in the past study, I said they didn't gain more muscle, but they lost more fat. You want to know why these did gain more muscle than the low protein group? Because the low protein group was under the 1.6 gram threshold. I told you the threshold for gaining muscle mass is 1.6 grams per kg of body weight. If you're consuming less than that, then you have capacity to consume more protein and keep gaining more muscle. If you're already consuming 1.6 grams of protein per kg of body weight, increasing that will not necessarily make you gain more muscle, but as evidenced by the previous study, it can make you lose more body fat. Are you following? I feel like I'm getting confusing, but hopefully you guys are following, and hopefully you guys re-listen to the protein intake series, because I think that that's really beneficial to what we're talking about here. So obviously the high protein group gained more muscle, but the high protein group also significantly decreased their body fat from 22.7% to 20.7%. So they lost 2% body fat and gained 4.6 pounds of lean muscle mass just by consuming more protein. Yes, they were consuming more calories as a whole, but they were consuming more calories from protein. That is kind of the overarching theme that I'm trying to get at here. And the low protein group did not see any changes in their body fat. So there you go. That was recomp. This study, more than anything, proves recomp as a whole. This was, I'm pretty sure, an 8-week study. They were given an 8-week resistance training program, and the high protein group gained 4.6 pounds of muscle and lost 2% body fat in 8 weeks while eating more protein and resistance training. So those are the two pillars that you should base your foundation on for body recomp, okay? The third pillar is the most variable. And when I say variable, I mean because this to me is really specific to the individual. When I have clients that come to me and say they want to recomp, well, firstly, very rarely do most of them come to me and say, I want to undergo body recomposition. Most people come to me and say, I want to grow my glutes and I want to snatch my waist. And I don't know if that's possible, but if it is, that's what I want to do. And when we strip away what they're getting at a body recomposition. They want to put on muscle mass and lose body fat. And we can't spot reduce body fat, so I can't specifically snatch your waist, but we can specifically build specific muscle groups up. So we can do training that focuses specifically on lower body or has a greater emphasis on glutes. A lot of my girls are on full body splits that have just greater lower body emphasis, specifically glutes or upper glute emphasis. And then we can ensure that we have the adequate conditions to be tightening up and or just significantly losing body fat as we go through that training program and as we just kind of keep progressing. And so the first thing that I do is I will find their maintenance. So we just find their intake where they're consistently tracking and they're not really changing body weight day to day or week to week. Obviously, daily fluctuations are normal, which is why I look at overall trends. But once we have a place where they've stabilized, we know that where we're going to see recomp is going to be somewhere around this maintenance. Some clients respond better to going slightly above maintenance. So a very, very conservative caloric surplus. Sometimes that is going to just create the conditions for them to train a little bit harder, put on a little bit more muscle, and actually by training harder and putting in more muscle, maybe theoretically they're partitioning nutrients more so to anabolic pathways. I don't know, because we don't have definitive science on what's going on mechanistically when we recomp. This is all just me speculating based on what I've seen from studies and then just from my clients. But some clients respond better to going slightly above maintenance. Other clients, their bodies just can't handle going above if the goal is to tighten up as we put on muscle. And some of those clients I have slightly below maintenance and being in a slight deficit. And at that slight deficit, so long as they're eating enough protein and they're training hard, we're not compromising their lean muscle mass, and we're still seeing that they're getting growth. However, this might be where that specific client has better results from like a tightening up standpoint. The biggest thing is you don't want to take yourself into too big of a surplus or too big of a deficit, because there's two sides to the recomp equation. There's putting on muscle, there's putting on body fat. If you get too deep into a deficit, you're going to drive the whole body recomp into just a fat loss phase, and you're going to compromise your ability to put on lean muscle mass and lean tissue. If you drive the surplus too aggressively and you go too far into the surplus, yeah, you're going to probably be gaining muscle at a slightly accelerated rate, but you're also probably not going to be dropping body fat because you're not creating the conditions metabolically for that to even be possible. So when we're talking about a recomp, we have to exist somewhere around maintenance. And I think this is mentally really hard to do by yourself, because a recomp, in terms of the immediate feedback that you're getting from your body's response, is so slow and so not immediately rewarding and not immediately gratifying that it makes you wonder if anything is happening at all. And that's why I think when I recomped, having a coach was the most valuable thing, because it kept me objective and it allowed me to put my trust elsewhere. I think I would have been really quick to make changes when I thought nothing was happening, and that would have worked against my overall desire to recomp. Because, I mean, if we're trying to lose body fat and gain muscle mass at the same time, from a scale standpoint and from an overall body weight standpoint, we don't expect to see that many changes in the scale, because gaining muscle mass is going to drive the scale up. Losing body fat is going to drive the scale down. So most recomp happens without very many changes in the scale and just kind of plateauing. And that is really frustrating for somebody who's trying to get some kind of validation out of the scale or out of their results and trying to figure out, like, is it happening? Is it happening? There's very little quantitative data that you can get in the short term when you're recomping that's validating that the recomp is happening. But visual pictures are going to be your number one best friend. How you feel at the gym, how your numbers are progressing at the gym, how your clothes are fitting. Like, all these things are going to help ensure that you are recomping. Like, those are kind of the more useful and more valuable feedback points that you should be focusing on. Another really good way of ensuring you're at a recomp is if previously you found that your maintenance was, I'm just going to use easy numbers. You're 150 pounds and you were eating 2,000 calories, and that's what you were eating to maintain 150 pounds. Say we moved you up to 2,100 calories and you maintained 150 pounds. Then we moved you up to 2,200 calories. Rarely do I increase my clients like 100 calories at a time, but I'm just using easy numbers. We move you up to 2,200 calories and you kind of go up to 152, but we hover there and slowly you're back down to 150. So now you're maintaining the same 150 pounds, but with 200 more calories. And kind of that's another way that we can ensure that recomp is happening. And this is more of like, in my opinion, like a metabolic indicator of recomp, but it's one of the proxies that I use to ensure that things are moving in the direction that we want them to be moving in. So that's kind of recomp in a nutshell. The biggest thing is if you are not comfortable setting up your overall caloric intake around maintenance, or you're not comfortable with being patient with yourself, or you just find that it's really hard or whatever it may be, then I recommend getting a coach or some kind of external accountability source that you trust knows what they're doing in order to ensure that you are indeed recomping. Because like I said, a lot of it you're not going to be able to see right away, and you're not going to be able to see for yourself, and you're not going to be able to see on the scale, and you just have to trust because it is a long-term process. Okay. So in terms of just reiterating the studies, we have the high protein study that I went through where they ate 3.4 grams per kg and lost body fat. There's another one where they ate 4.4 grams per kg and they also lost body fat. We had Dr. Campbell's study where, again, they did gain muscle mass and lose body fat. And all in all, these are all studies that I've covered in the protein series. And like I said, there's not one specific study we can point to where I'm like, this studied specifically body recomp, but across different studies with different aims where we see recomp happened, these three conditions come up time and time again. These three conditions are consistent across studies where recomp ended up occurring. And that is adequate high protein resistance training and an intake around maintenance. None of these studies employed aggressive surpluses or aggressive deficits. Most of these studies were at or around maintenance. And that is the harder part to figure out when you're recomping, because I find with some of my clients, they respond better to being slightly above maintenance. Some respond better to being slightly below maintenance. And you have to be willing to undergo that trial and error process and just undergo that process of learning how your body responds. And it is easier to do with somebody else. And I know I keep talking about my clients and coaching, and in case I haven't said this, I do have a couple one-on-one coaching client spots left for the semester. So if you are interested, I have my application linked in the description below. And this is kind of what a check-in looks like for my clients. If they ask any questions or ask about anything scientific, I take that as my opportunity to absolutely yap, because I do video responses. So we'll go through the justification for anything that we do if that's what you want. But I make adjustments as needed. This is what most of my clients are on recomps. So anywho, I think that that's kind of what I want to talk about today. I am going to attempt to go back to weekly episodes, but depending on how the semester evolves, I might start doing bi-weekly episodes. But I vowed, and I set this as like one of my 2025 commandments, was to not drop below bi-weekly episodes. So at the very least, you're going to get 2 episodes from me a month. We're back and we're better than ever. I'm going to try to keep episodes a little bit more applicable as we reference the science, but not just the science. Like, how does the science apply to you? I think just in general, last semester, my classes were more technical, and that's just kind of what I had available. And I wanted to stick to my vision of making my podcast a free master's education. And I mean, in case you're curious, if you listen to I love you guys. I missed you guys. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next episode.